The sky above the wall did not brighten so much as pale, a slow surrender of black to bluer shades of cold, and the wind there was the old wind, thin and tireless, worrying at men and stone alike. The broken bite at Eastwatch made the horizon look unfinished, a tooth knocked from the smile of a winter god. Jon stood with a gloved hand on the ice and smelled it. Chalk and salt and something faintly sweet, the breath of very old snow pressed into time. Ghost paused at his knee, white as the day that had killed 1,000 names and given back only ash and memory, and nudged the fur at Jon's hip. "I know," Jon murmured, though he did not know. The wall had always told lies of permanence, and now it made a different promise, that even great things might be reforged into other shapes. He looked south, where the new gift rolled gray with frost. A skein of cook smoke lifted from Mole's town and curled into the morning. Free folk fires burned there now, and the smell was as familiar as any winter. Bone broth and rendered fat, damp wood and peat, the tang of iron. "Your people make good stew," Tormund had told him last night at the long tables of Castle Black, slapping his belly and tearing bread. "Needs more onions, and more courage. Onions for the breath, courage for the blood." "They're your people," Jon had answered, and Tormund laughed and called him Little Crow and said they were both wrong. The ravens found Jon on the snow-swept yard at sunrise, 3 together, because the day had been chosen for omen. The lead bird's leg bore a braided cord the color of river mud and spun gold, southern court prettiness grafted onto a wild thing's life. Jon fed the bird from his palm before he unknotted the cord with numb fingers. The parchment showed 2 seals impressed together in beeswax. The 3-eyed sigil of the king whose gaze traveled the world of men like a winter shadow moving along a frozen stream, and the crowned direwolf of the north. The king's wax was pale, the queen's wax deep red. Jon broke the wax with his thumb and read in a wind that tugged at the words as if it meant to take them back. He read Bran's short sentences, spare, as if the quill could not keep pace with thoughts that moved in roads of roots and wings, and Sansa's less spare ones, precise as a thin-bladed knife. "Brother," Bran wrote, "we have seen the shape of it. The wall remains, the need remains, but changed. The watch must be mended or it will matter the next time, and the men who try to bind it then will have neither time nor kindness. The realm beyond the wall holds men. We are charged with them also. And Sansa, the North is sovereign and will remain so. The free folk are not enemies, but they are not yet neighbors. I will grant the new gift for their wintering under conditions to be agreed, and I will support your command if you will command. We will require a charter that both crowns can sign. We will require discipline and coin and bread. If this is to be done, it must be done with clear eyes. Come to Winterfell when you are ready." Jon read the words twice, then folded the letter and tucked it against the warmth of his undercloak. He stood with his head bent a long while, the wind pulling at the fur along his shoulders, Ghost's breath a small white engine at his thigh. He had dreaded summonses ever since he first heard the grand clatter of King's Landing's promises, and he dreaded this one because it was not a summons at all. It was permission. It was choice. He'd thought choice had been taken from him when he drove steel where he never wished to drive it. He'd thought he had spent the last of himself under a broken vault of stone. Duty had remained like a hinge that would not stop squealing, even without a door to bear. "Come on, you silent bastard," Tormund called from the steps that climbed up to the top of the wall. "If I have to freeze my bits, you do too. There's a listen waiting to be had up there. A listen. Aye, the ice talks. You put your ear to it and it tells you what we're too busy shouting to hear." Jon went. He climbed with Tormund and 2 young men who'd followed Tormund out of a dozen raids into peace. Varek, a spare bone then with sharp eyes, and Dancer, who had never danced with anything but knives but moved as if music remembered him anyway. Snow rasped under their boots, and the air was so clear that every small sound felt like a far bell. At the top, the world spread enormous to all points, sharp and spare and indifferent. They lay belly down against the windbreak, furs pulled tight, faces pressed to ice. Jon heard it like a far, low hum, a hive in the heart of a wintering tree. It was motion in standstill. It was the weight of a continent remembering. He listened until his skin prickled and his eyes watered, until memory rose inside him like something that could drown. Then he pushed himself up and said, "We'll do it," quietly, because there was no other way to say it. Tormund did not ask what he meant. He clapped Jon's shoulder with a hand so heavy his bones felt it. "Good," he said. "Now we put words and wood where your mouth is." They began with a fire in the hall and a map on the table. The map was the same old map the Watch had used since men had decided ink could tame the shape of a land that had no interest in being tamed. Someone had once drawn little trees to show the haunted forest. Someone had drawn little mountains like fat knuckles and a river like a ribbon that would not lie flat. New hands had scribbled more recent matters. The breach, the route the dead had taken, the caches where dragonglass had been stacked quiet and ominous as black bread. Jon flattened the parchment with the heel of his hand. "We can repair Eastwatch enough to hold ships again," he said. "We can't fix the wall as it was. Not quickly, maybe never. We should not pretend we can. We should build as if men will need to move across this line, north and south, and as if they will need to do it in peace." "And if they don't?" asked a young crow from Old Town. He was so new his black cloak still squeaked like new leather when he moved. "If the free folk like peace the way a dire wolf likes a bone for a year and then remembers meat, they don't forget meat," Tormund said mildly. "No one does. But men who have left their dead in the snow do get tired of needing to leave more." "Peace is not a bone," Jon said. "It's a hearth. Hard to build, easy to break. The way you keep it is to make it warmer than the cold outside. You keep the woodpile stacked, you keep the sparks tended, and you keep a bucket hanging on the peg for when someone kicks the fire over by accident or malice." "So," said the new crow, "a hearth, and buckets, and law," Jon said. "The Watch held law at the edge of the world because it held itself apart. The world changed. We have to hold law inside the world now." He put a finger on the new gift. "We'll establish 2 wintering grounds for free folk, with fences and fields and the right to gather wood. We'll assign Legion patrols." "Legion," said Tormund, testing the word. "It's fancier than Watch." "It's a different thing," Jon said. "The Watch stood only against. The Legion must stand for. We will keep the old vows for those who take the black as their life, and we will establish terms of service for those who serve a winter count and return to their people. Both will swear to the same law. Both will keep honor." "They'll say you're making 2 kinds of men," Varric said, expressionless. "I'm making 2 doors into the same house. Some will choose one, some the other. If the house stands, it won't matter who came in how." "We need bread," said Dancer, with the bluntness of a man who had eaten roots. "Bread before vows." "Bread," Jon agreed, "and bronze and boots. Letters from the king and queen will bring coin. But not enough. We'll need the northern lords to take this as their own. They won't if we act as if they have no say." He tapped the parchment where Winterfell sat like a starflower drawn in blocky stark strokes. "I go to Winterfell. I make the case. Then, if she agrees, we call a meeting at Queen's Crown. Free folk and Northmen. Representatives from King's Landing can come if they have the stomach for our cold. We speak the terms in front of both peoples. We swear, and we go to work." "You'll need a new oath," Tormund said. "New words for old snow. I'll want to hear them before I twist my old tongue around them." "I know," Jon said. He did not know the words yet, but the wall's hum was still on his skin, and the hum had said, "Now." He rode south with Ghost padding like a pale shadow 2 paces off, with Tormund and a dozen free folk who had taken the notion of being escorted as a sort of jest they didn't mind playing along with, and with a handful of black cloaks who remembered orders as a comfort in any weather. The sky cut their cheekbones and the ground lay crisp under white. They slept in the longhouse at the last hearth, which had moved its own heart toward Winterfell after its old heart had been taken and burned. The hearth fire there was great enough to make the rafters sweat, and the quiet men around it looked up and nodded as Jon entered and said little after. He was not a king, and that was a relief to them. He rode through the ruins of Queen's Crown, the old tower slumping into its moat as if listening to what the reeds were saying. The sawgrass hissed with wind and remembered snow. They camped there and ghost hunted, returning with his muzzle scarlet and his eyes bright. Jon warmed his hands over a peat fire and watched embers lift and lose themselves to the night, and thought of Sam, somewhere south to the warmth, setting a kettle on a small council hearth, offering knowledge as cheerfully as he once had offered books to a boy who'd thought books were tamer than swords. Winterfell rose from the earth as if it had grown there, and Jon's heart moved in his chest as if the stones themselves tugged at it. He had known every path of its yards once, every bite of iron on a gate, every echo of footfall on stair. He rode through the gatehouse with a pale direwolf at his side, and the guard stepped back because old stories could still startle even men who had stood calm under a dead sky. Sansa met him in the great hall, where banners had learned to lift without threat of ash. Her crown was iron and simple and sat against her hair as if it had been waiting there since girls had learned to braid for winter. She hugged him, hard, in front of everyone, and when they let go there was no mistaking what they were. Home and scar and blood both, and that made the mutter in the hall change its tone. They ate. They would always eat before the work was put on the table. It was northern courtesy and a northern tactic. Warm a man before you ask him to go out into wind. Fill his hands before you ask him to set them to your labor. Jon sat with ghost curled like a mountain at his feet and drank broth and ale and listened to men speak of small matters. A boar that had taken to ruining fences. A girl who had run off with a tanner's son and was found in a barn laughing and then sorry. Late ice on the lake that had claimed a careless boy who'd been named after a fallen king out of pride and misfortune. The hall told its truths, the way halls do when they feel safe enough to be petty. After, they sat before the fire Sansa had coaxed into a friend instead of a master. She held Bran's letter in her lap and tapped it once with her finger. He says you've decided. I have, Jon said. She did not look surprised. You want to stay here, she said softly, not as a question. He laughed low. Not because it was funny, but because honesty sometimes comes out that way. I want to be 5 again, he said. I want to climb to the top of the first keep and scare the maids and eat apples tart from the cellar and sit with father in the gods' wood without knowing time can end. Sansa looked at the fire. I wanted a great many things, she said. Some of them came like crumbs and some like blows. We grow around both. She looked back up. Tell me the shape of what you'll make. He told her. Wintering grounds at Molestown and Queen's Crown. Patrols paired black and free. A tribunal with an even number from both peoples and a neutral chair. The right to gather in the new gift and the duty to pay for grazed pasture with labor and lumber. The right to travel the winter road under Legion protection and the duty to submit to Legion arbiters in disputes that crossed the line of frost. He spoke of 2 oaths, a life oath for those who took the black in the old way, a winter oath for those who took service by season, counted in years or snows, and of the law he wanted to write with Sam's help and a maester's clean hand. Sansa listened until the light made a pool on the table between them, until Ghost had shut his eyes and opened them and shut them again. They will say it's weak, that you should make the free folk come on their knees. They don't kneel. They will say so. They will have reasons. Their grandfathers died with frost in their lungs. I know. He thought of old Nan's stories and of the way Lord Glover had set his jaw and claimed insult like bread when the North had called banners and the Glovers had thought themselves slighted. We can't demand that free folk be what they're not to soothe a hurt we can't heal by lying to it. We can only make a place where both sides lose less, and we can make it with rules that make the losing fair. I believe you, Sansa said after a long while. I would not always have, but I have learned to hear the difference between a song and a plan. This is a plan. She touched the parchment. I will cede the new gift for the wintering grounds on condition of Legion law. I will require that the Legion is funded by both crowns proportional to the safety the arrangement provides. I will require that a northern captain sits as one of the 3 on your command council, and that the Legion carries no banner of wolf or lion or dragon. No banner at all? Jon asked. A new banner, Sansa said, and a corner of her mouth lifted. A black field with a gate upon it that is open, or a road that goes both ways. You'll let the women serve. You always did when no one was looking. They served when the living needed everyone, Jon said. We still do, Sansa said. I will not hand you an edict to break on your first day. Men will object, Jon said mildly. They always do, Sansa said. They will learn. Bran's charter. I will affix my seal to it. I will send Lord Serwyn to your council. He will be difficult and dutiful, and that's why he is useful. She sat back. We will hold the meet at Queen's Crown. If you can bring Tormund and a dozen chiefs who are not fools, we will make something. I can bring 24 fools and that will be enough, Tormund announced from the doorway, startling 3 guards who had been breathing like furniture. It's the fewer wise ones who take convincing anyway. Sansa's smile reached her eyes, briefly. Your stories about him do not do him justice, she said to Jon. They never did, Jon said. The meet at Queen's Crown began under a sky that leaked fine white like flour from a rip in a winter sack. Men and women came, Ballinks and Umbers and Manderly men with their fish pins and their pale bellies swelling above belts. Tall free folk wrapped in patched furs. Thens with scarred cheeks and the flatness of men who'd learned not to give their faces to enemies. Children climbed the wobbled stones of the ruined tower and shrieked when their mothers shouted them down. A cook fire collapsed, and 20 hands saved the meat and 20 tongues wedded a joke into something everyone could chew. Jon spoke first because the place needed a spine to be built, and sometimes a spine is speech. He did not speak as a king, and the sky breathed easier because of it. He spoke as a man whose lungs knew the wall's air and whose knuckles still remembered the white of a blade that had not been snow. He spoke of bread and law and the right of a child to sleep where no dead thing would wake it. He spoke of the Legion as a we too broad to break and too stubborn to bend into someone's old story. Sansa spoke second. Her voice traveled like the winter wind when it had decided to go somewhere quickly. She confirmed the grant of the wintering grounds. She described the cost. She described the duty. She spoke of the North's sovereignty and hospitality, in that order, and you could feel the list of it in the bones. Lord Serwyn spoke after, lean as an axe blade, his eyes like gray wolfstone. He set limits as he had been sent to do. He named punishments for Legion men who violated Northern folk, and he named punishments for Northern men who violated Free folk under Legion protection. He did not smile because his job did not require smiles and because he was not good at them anyway. Then Tormund spoke. He did not climb anything because stairs did not make him taller. He stood in the clearing among men and shouted like a man with a pelt to sell and a story to tell. We will try this because we tried killing and that went poorly, he said, and the honest laughter broke like a thaw in a hard place. We will try this because we are tired of small gods dying in small fires for big men's pride. We will try this because I want to die warm in a good bed after eating something that was alive yesterday instead of not alive last year. They wrote a charter that afternoon with the sky thinking about turning to steel and then dismissing the idea. Sam sent a maester out from Old Town with ink good enough to glisten and a hand good enough to keep it from blotting. He was not Sam, but he had Sam's cheer and his caution not to confuse a good sentence with a good decision. He wrote as Jon spoke, and then as Sansa amended, and then as Lord Serwyn enumerated. He sighed as Tormund made the maester spell out words like arbitrament and leniency by the syllable until they made sense in free folk mouths. They named the command of the Knights Legion in 3 chairs: the Lord Commander of the Black Cloak, the Free Captain of the Winter Hosts, the Crown's Captain, appointed by the 6 kingdoms and agreed by the North. They named an oath in 2 forms. The first was the Old Oath, amended only where law had been altered by the living. Night gathers, and now my watch begins. It shall not end until my last breath gives me back to snow. I shall take no wife, hold no lands, father no children, possess no gold that is not the Legion's need. I shall wear no crown, bear no false colors. I shall live and die at my post. I am the shield that guards the living. I am the road that runs both ways. I am the open gate. I pledge my life and honor to the Knights Legion, for this night and all the nights to come. The second was a winter oath, written so that it could be bent to seasons. Winter comes and I will keep its peace. For 5 winters counted or 10 years named, I will bear the Legion's marks and answer its law. I shall hold no feud, take no plunder outside the Legion's right. I shall stand for the living, Drink with friend and settle with enemy under the legion's eye. I am the road and the watcher at the road. I pledge my seasons and my strength to the Knights' Legion, for this winter and the winters after, until my term is done. Free folk took the second with a thunder that made ravens change trees. Northern boys and a few northern girls who had grown up on dead tales took the first with serious mouths and a swift, luminous fear that felt enough like pride to walk in the same boots. Jon said the words with them and felt something he had thought would never come again lay its hand on his shoulder. It was not joy, it was purpose, which is both quieter and harder. They began at Queen's Crown because it sat where two roads and two waters argued. The old tower was too far gone, so they built long houses and a watch hall that leaned on posts so thick that 3 men could not touch fingers around them. At Mole's Town they dug and shored and lifted timbers into winter skeletons. Women split wood and men wove fences and children fetched water until fetching was a game with rules and songs. The Legion's mark appeared on sleeves and shields. A black field with an open gate picked out in white thread, stark and clean and universally disliked by every man who had wanted his sigil to be the one chosen. Sansa sent a quartermaster named Harl, who had learned in famine to make a loaf from stone and pride. The crown sent coin and a crown captain. Ser Talwyn of the Marches, a tall, tired man with poor humor and excellent memory and a scar across his cheek like a line a child had drawn in ink. The free captain was Tormund, by applause and common sense, and because there was no other man in the world who could have filled it and not break the roof with laughter at the idea. Jon held the Lord Commander's chair because there was no one else, because the men looked to him and the free folk watched him to see if he'd flinch from their watching. He did not flinch. He did build quietly, and he went where things were wrong. He walked the winter road until he knew every bend where a wagon would stick and every ford where ice lipped the stone and every place men would prefer to settle their own law and would have to be taught not to. He sat tribunal until night fell on 3 disagreements and the parties went outside for a piss and did not come back because they had decided to leave one another alone after all. He stood on a low stone and recited the law to a drunken then who had put a knife in a northern man's thigh over a dice throw. And then Jon sat beside both of them as the maester stitched one and Tormund lectured the other about the quality of knives and the uses of fists. The first blood was spilled not by malice but by fear that had been waiting decades to call itself reason. A sally of glovers returning from a deer hunt met a band of free folk hauling sledges of frozen fish through an old stand of birch within the new gift. They startled one another like cats in a cellar, the men shouting raiders, and the free folk bracing for blows they'd had a lifetime of receiving. A boy, he could not have been 16, loosed an arrow in panic, and the arrow took a free woman in the belly. Her name was Asa, and she was known for a laugh like kettle-lid clatter and for climbing trees even after 5 births. She fell, and the sound she made was mostly breath leaving, and the boy stood with his hands out like a man who had dropped a cup and wanted to prove it had been empty. The free folk drew steel in the same heartbeat. Somewhere a dog barked and somewhere a crow called, and the world decided not to be simple. The Legion patrol reached them because the winter road had made them quicker. Jon arrived with Ser Talwyn at one side and Varek at the other and Ghost already nosing the snow as if he could smell the future there. Jon put himself between the lines and did not raise his voice. "She's dying," said a woman with salt at her lips. Asa's sister by the look of her hair. "I know," Jon said. "If you let our maester through, he can make her death quick and not cruel if she must die. If she might live, we will carry her to the hall and use all we have to keep her. If she lives, the boy will give a life winter, and you will decide how he pays it out." "Life winter," Asa's sister spat. "Crow words. Legion words," Tormund said, coming up like a bear through brush. "Not crow, not kneeler. Words we all put our hands on. She has 5 children. And I had 6 once," Tormund said, and his voice shook only like old wood. The boy shat himself. Look at him. He thought he was going to be a tale the Hall loved, and he turned into a tale the Hall hates. The Legion's law says a life for a life is not always a body for a body. The law says a life can be paid in winters, and that debt belongs to the one who owes it, not to his father or his house. "It's a thin law," growled a Glover man. "It's a hard law," Jon said. "Harder to hold than my sword, but it holds more lives. They let the maester through. Asa lived a day and a night, her laugh gone, her eyes dimming like coals that should have been banked better. She died at dawn while snow fell tinily, and the boy, whose name was Aubert and who had never been further north than that birch stand, stood in the hall with his mouth open like a fish. Jon told him his winters. "You'll serve 10 winters by the legion's count," he said. "You will go where we send you. You will hold no sword but a legion sword. You will marry no one and you will make no child. You will give half your wages to Asa's children until each of them has reached the number of years your hand has spared them. When 10 winters are done, you may go where you wish. If you break this term, the legion will claim your life." The hall breathed with that, and some of the breath was angry. Asa's sister spat again and then, sudden as the breaking of a lake crust, she said, "And if he serves those winters well, he may bring fish to my door and I will feed him a bowl for each year of them." The first time they brought a free folk raid to heal without blood came sooner than Jon would have guessed and later than he had feared. A band of young Ice River men, hungry and restless and bored with building fences, slipped into the new gift and took 2 fat sheep because fat sheep bleed slower than lean ones, and because they had grown up with a story that said, "If you don't take, someone will take from you first." The sheep belonged to a Karstark widow whose heart had been ground down to gristle and who had no patience for the Legion's experiments. They caught the boys by the Simpson stream with lamb's fat on their hands and panic in their eyes. Varric drawled the law at them while Jon watched the widow's mouth tighten and considered how quickly the entire day could fall into old habits. He told the boys their options and he told the widow hers. "We can take thumbs," he said plainly, because not saying a harsh thing made it more likely to arrive disguised as a kinder one. "Or they can pay with work and meat and a season on a chain." "Chain?" One of the boys barked, affronted that chains would be named in peacetime. "A chain to remind your legs that other men's fear exists," Jon said. He looked at the widow. "What do you prefer?" She stared at the boys and then at her hands. "Thumbs will cripple them and then they'll steal because they can't work," she said, which was the kind of sense that grows in poor soils. "I prefer their backs, and their meat, a sheep's worth from each. I prefer them to put up a fence for my lambing pen and to keep watch a season, each a week at a time." The chains were leather, not iron. They were humiliating and heavy, and they clicked when the boys ran. The boys learned not to run. They put up the fence. One of them was good with a hatchet and did twice the work because he hated that he was good at anything lawful, the way a boy sometimes hates the sound of his own name when it's said kindly. The widow fed them soup without salt and then with salt, which was her way of moving from anger to practicality. The Legion grew the way fires grow when wood is stacked without vanity. Men came because their brothers had gone, and because it looked like a way to hold a purpose that did not require swearing to a lord who had failed them at an hour that mattered. Women came quietly at first and then not quietly at all. They shot straighter and argued longer and kept books with lines in them like knife marks between tents and wagons. The maester frowned and then taught, and the poachers learned their letters more slowly than they learned the law. Word from the south came in parcels. The Crown's captain received dispatches sealed in wax scented faintly with the oranges that grew where men worried about heat more than cold. The king did not come because roads are for men with legs that obey, but his eye came north in birds that did not obey distance. And when it came, the Legion's ravens spoke new words in old voices. The hand of the king wrote that the Iron Bank was willing to lend against peace, which was the first time any southern man had believed peace a commodity worthy of being measured and sold. Brienne of Tarth wrote in a steady hand that she would come north with a small retinue to look at things herself, because a sword sometimes knows what a quill does not. Sam arrived one gray afternoon with ink stains on his fingers and a chain that clanked as he hugged Jon, clumsy and full as always, and Ghost slunk between them and accepted Sam's rough strokes like a lord permitting adoration. "You look thinner," Sam said, and Jon laughed. "You look heavier," he answered. "Only with books," Sam said, and they both smiled like men who had kept each other alive by reading in the dark. Sam loved the charter like a gardener loves an ugly sprout that means food, and he hated bits of it like a maester should. "You must specify what counts as a winter," he said, tapping the phrase. "Is it the passage of a year, reckoned by moons, or the passage of snow, reckoned by the turning of the cold? If men can argue, they will, and they'll wait until the argument benefits them most. Years, Jon said. Count them by moons because we have too few men to keep calendars and too many to keep opinions. And the law about insults, Sam said, pressing his lips together in a way that once had made boys giggle and now made hardened men revise their neighboring sentences. It says that if a man insults a woman within the legion's bounds and she strikes him, she pays no fine. That's very generous. It's sensible, said Ragna, a spearwife who had taken the winter oath and who had discovered she loved making streets straight even more than she loved making men fearful. If men know their mouths will cost them teeth, they keep their mouths for chewing. I'll write it exactly thus, Sam said, and did. They rebuilt Eastwatch in a way that made men who love old things uncomfortable and men who love functioning things nearly glad. The sea came and left and came again with the patience of a story told to children, and it carried with it the rumor of ships with striped sails who had never learned their place in the hearts of decent people. Ser Davos sent word that he would send a ship with oak beams thick enough to stand up to a god's mood and nails as long as a giant's finger. He sent instructions about tides, and he sent a note that made Jon's mouth tilt. You always were a stubborn lad. Good. Stubborn holds a door against a bad wind. Keep doing this. I'll keep sending you the wood to do it. When Brienne arrived, she looked at the boys and girls training in a yard with snow in their hair and determination in their cheeks and said, You'll need spears you can mend, not swords you can polish. And then showed them where to put their hands so the shaft became a lever and not a burden. She watched Tormund spar with a crown man and laughed aloud, which surprised her and him both, because laughter came less easily out of summer. They found troubles that did not plan themselves around their charters. A sickness ripped through Mole's town and found children first. The maester worked until his hands looked boiled and his eyes clouded. And he lost 3 and saved 7 and then lost 2 more and stood in the snow and wept without sound. The Legion paid the family's winters out of the coffers, and Jon sat with a woman who had put her baby into Earth and listened to her speak about how Earth does not deserve our dead and how it gets them anyway. He had no words for it, and that was the only decent thing to say. Sometimes silence honored more than vows. Trouble that planned itself came in the spring, when the ice was like glass and men mistook literal for figurative. A Magner from the Thens, not Verex but another line that had remembered hate like a hearth inheritance, swept down with 40 men and declared the Legion a crow trick and Queen's crown a cage. He cracked a skull at the gate and called it a declaration. He threw the mark of the Legion into a latrine and called it law. He stood in the white and shouted, and sometimes that works if the listening is fearful enough. Jon went out to meet him like a man going to stand between 2 boys who have decided that a shove is worth their winter. He left his helm off and his hair unbound, and he spoke in a free folk way first, because the free thing to do is to speak where a man can hear. You can call me crow or traitor, he said. I've been called worse by better enemies. Take your men and go back. This place is for peace. If you want to fight, fight me. The Magner Crun, square as an anvil, snorted. You are as soft as your coat, he said. You think a duel cures a herd of disease. I'll fight you, and then I'll hang your head on your gate, and then I'll carry your women out by their hair. You'd need 2 hands for that, Ragna observed, and then she threw him a knife. But do try. If you like living with one, it's a look. Crun laughed. Come, he said to Jon, because a duel was a story he understood. He took a broad-bladed axe off his back and held it like an old woman holds a broom, and then like a man holds a child, and then like a warrior holds a future he intends to cut into shape. They fought in a patch of snow that would melt no faster for watching, and the Legion formed a ring that was not entirely clean of bedding, and Tormund shouted obscenities that were both old and creative, and Ghost stood like a statue with fire behind his eyes. Crun pressed early because he was heavy and because heavy has a window in which it is advantage. Jon gave ground like a man leading a drunk out of a hall, and then he found his timing. He remembered Donal Noy's voice in his ear like an insult he had come to treasure. He remembered Corran Halfhand's breath like iron. He remembered a girl with red hair telling him that nothing he thought he knew about anything mattered in the face of the cold. He parried and cut low and let Crun's sweat begin to work against him. When Jon found the moment, It came like a flaw in the glass underfoot, invisible until weight found it. He feinted a high cut, flicked, and razored edge met Crun's thigh under the plates where free folk smithing could not reach because time in good or had been spent on other bits. Blood came bright as a story told out of turn. Crun grunted and swung, but the heavy swing dragged in the wet. Jon slipped inside and put Longclaw against the Magner's throat. Crun froze as men do when their bodies cannot quite tell if a movement will be the last one they comprehend. "Yield," Jon said. Crun spat a mouthful of red onto the white. "I yield to no crow." "Good," Jon said. "Yield to the Legion, then. Stay and you serve those winters. Go, and you carry a white mark on your cheek that says the gate turned you back. The next time you come with men and malice, you'll wear that mark into the dark." Crun's eyes were not stupid. The old story he had brought could not shoulder its way past the new one Jon held out. He chose the mark, then, because scars made better tales to his people when he needed them. Varric cut the mark with a steady hand, and the crowd looked at it and remembered it and then, like sensible men, made stew. After that, the trouble for a time was simple. Boots wore out faster than roads could be dug. Men would always prefer to gamble in the corner than straighten lines in ledgers. Sheep insisted on being sheep. The Legion's law found its rhythm like a smith finds the 1-2 of hammer and breath. Assault, theft, insult, trespass, insult again, assault again, insult again. Words did not stop being weapons, but they learned where the armory was and took their turns. Ghost killed a snowcat that had developed a taste for chickens and had carried off 3 from the same yard because a cat who learns the shape of a fence will always learn how to jump it with less sound. Jon watched the cat die and put his hand on Ghost's bloody head and felt alive and terribly tired. It was Mira Reed who brought word of the trouble that did not know charters, coming out of the mists of the green like a girl stepping out of an older tale wearing a newer face. She came with her hood thrown back and the grin that had once made a cold, clever boy think warmth might exist outside his books. She embraced Jon as if he still came up to her shoulder. She knelt and wrapped her arms around Ghost's neck until he licked her ear, offended and amused. "The mists," she said when they sat, and she took the hot cup into her cold fingers with a relief that said she had used her hands hard. "They're wrong. In the deep bogs and then further north, beyond the King's Road's northernmost good sense. It's not whites. It's not anything. It's weather with mind. It sits. It waits. Spreads. Men walk into it and do not come out. The hunters say it eats sound." The frogs stopped singing. Jon felt the wall's old hum in his bones, the way a house retains the warmth of a fire long after the ashes look dead. "Show me," he said. They rode with Mira into a landscape that loved to lie to the eye. The neck had always been a pulse under the world's belt, treacherous and slippery and green beyond reason. But this was something else. The mists lay like cloth and rose like breath. The Legion had never meant to patrol here. They had meant to keep to their line like a man keeps to his promises. But law is a map of where people go, not only where they are told to stay, and men had gone into the green to hunt because they were hungry and because they were men. They found the first of the dead by the roots of a dead tree that still somehow cast shade. The man lay as if sleeping, his mouth a little open. His eyes rhymed with a frost that had learned to resist sun. His hands looked burned with cold. His expression was blank only if you had never seen fear learn resignation. They found the second near a sinkhole, and his face had less to say. The third they did not find at all, only his boot with his name carved on the heel, as if he had been a man who feared forgetting more than being forgotten. "Not whites," Jon said, crouching beside the first. There was no smell of the unnatural on the air. There was nothing but peat and the slow, clean rot that feeds the world when men are not looking. Something else. "The Crannog men say the mists are old," Mira said. "Older than old. They say the children used to sing to them. They say the mists liked those songs and disliked all others." "We can't sing with those throats," Tormund muttered, eyeing the white breath at his lips as if it might try to go farther than usual. "We can choose how we step in it," Jon said. He looked at Mira. "Can your people guide our folk around it? We don't need to beat the mist. We need to treat it like a lord with a bad temper and a big house. We go where it is not and leave bread on its doorstep and hope it appreciates manners. Mira's mouth curved. Your poetry got better, she said, which was a cruelty only because it was true. They marked the bog with reed bundles and bits of oak, leaving signs that men who could not read could still learn quickly. They sent word south for tinder and for braziers tall enough to keep a night alive. They taught boys to walk with a rope tied at their waist and another boy holding the oar. Their end. They told them not to be ashamed of fear because fear is a rope too, and sometimes the only one that keeps a man from stepping off a path into nothing. The mists retreated not at all, which was its right. They worked around them, which was theirs. That was how the Legion learned that the world did not intend to let them have their experiments unchallenged, and that was not news so much as reminder. Spring did not break so much as unbuckle, and with it came men with boats drawn by wheels who wanted to trade fishhooks for furs and lamp oil for rumors and ideas for ideas. They told stories in the longhouses and left with different stories to tell elsewhere. Queen's Crown became a place where all stories came to be measured by whether they helped to feed a child that winter. The hall developed a smell that was not unpleasant. Smoke and pottage and leather and ink. John dreamed more often in the spring. He dreamed of green small courtyards and of a girl whose hair had smelled like summer and of a blade he no longer wanted to feel. He dreamed of faces he had loved and faces he had failed and faces he had loved and failed together, and he woke sometimes with his hand on ghost without remembering he had put it there. He walked the yard at night and listened to men snore and felt the satisfaction that soldiers have always felt when they can count the breathing without counting any gaps. He stood on the rebuilt palisade and watched the road show traffic in the moonlight, and he felt the future like a reticent dog that had decided to sit near him but not put its head under his hand yet. Arya's letter came carried by a ship's boy with ears that looked too big for his head and a grin that looked too big for his face. He had a tattoo of a compass on his wrist with the south mark darkened, as if the artist had a sense of humor and a preference. The letter smelled faintly of salt and tar. It was short and made of wind. It said she had found a sea where the stars in the water did not match the stars in the sky, and that she was fine and that he should keep breathing. He laughed when he read it, the kind of laugh that shakes old things loose, and then he tucked the letter under a box of maps as if it were tinder that he could not bear to use. Summer came like an apology that did not make the winter a mistake. They harvested carrots and hard greens and potatoes eager to be something other than potatoes. They built a schoolhouse because knowledge multiplies where children can stand on benches and shout wrong answers without shame. Ragna taught sums to men with scars, and Varric taught boys to hold a spear and not a grudge, and Ser Talwyn taught the crown's law where it served the legions and forgot to teach it where it did not. Sansa sent bees and a beekeeper, and suddenly the air near the longhouses spoke a new language and the kitchens learned a sweetness that did not depend on fruit. There were fights still. Fists found faces and knives found mistakes. A crown merchant tried to take a girl by the wrist, and the girl took him by the ear, and then Ragna took him by the contract, and he decided to take himself back to the safely profitable plains below the neck. A free folk boy cut a Manderly man's purse and learned that coins make awful meals and that kneelers could truss a thief as quickly as any raider could. He worked his winters with a sullen industriousness that made Ragna smile behind his back and fold his wages into Ace's youngest child's hand with a patience that made Jon wonder if the world might one day put away its swords not because they are wrong but because they are finally bored of being right. Then, because stories have a taste for pattern and malice both, the men who bound the world in different places decided to test the Legion's quiet. Ironborn from the cold Western Isles who had lost a war and come away with their love of taking sharpened by loss raided the coast near the Salt Spear where the new gift almost met sea. They took 2 small girls and a barrel of pickled fish and set a hut alight and thought themselves sailors again, which is a thought that often leads to drowning. The Legion had not planned for ships. The Legion had planned for roads. But roads lead to water or else they are just lines in dirt, and so Jon called banners of the kind the Legion could call. A dozen boats that owed favors to Ser Davos, a handful of hardy men who had used oars more often than swords, and 3 wildling rafts that looked made of stubbornness and twine. Ser Talwyn found a man from White Harbor who could make a galley think it was a hound and shout its heart into running, and they went out into a cold morning to learn on the water what they had been pretending they could ignore. Battle on water is nothing like battle on land and exactly like it at once. Men are stupid with fear in both places. Men are poor with courage in both places. The Ironborn came in yelling and oars up, and the Legion's patchwork fleet moved like a man who had to use both arms even though he'd broken one and bound it. And they met where the sea slapped at their inadequacy and made them pay for it. Jon fought on the prow like a boy from a tale because sometimes a tale demands an absurdity. He cut where hands reached and he stabbed where eyes told him someone meant to do worse than theft. And he learned that he still hated the moment when steel leaves flesh and the sound it makes in that small moment that always finds a man in his dreams later. Ghost had not come because Ghost did not care for boats, but Ghost's absence made Jon fight more carefully. He had to be his own luck that day. Ser Talwyn took a cut that would lay him up and wives would pity him for, and Ragna killed a man who had sneered a line about women and immediately afterward asked Jon if he wanted to eat fish forever because if not he should really find a better way to end this kind of day. They retook the pickled fish and the two girls, who turned out to be murderously unimpressed with their own kidnapping, to the fury of the Ironborn men who had expected tears and got boredom. They burned the raiders' ship as close to politely as arson allows. They sent the Ironborn back with one or missing and the enduring insult of being told that if they returned they would be forced to build a dock that would be dedicated to the memory of their poor choices. Brienne looked at the charters and the kitchens and the rosters and the map they had made into a quilt of colors and wax, and she said, "It will hold," and she did not say, "Unless men decide not to want it to," because that was not how the Legion chose to talk in its halls. It chose to say what it would do, not what it feared. Word from King's Landing continued to arrive like weather. Tyrion Lannister wrote in a hand that showed drink and discipline both, that the crown remained committed and that Bronn remained disagreeable and that coin remained coin and it would stop being coin if spent like water. He added a postscript in which he told Jon to drink any wine that reached him with great suspicion because it had almost certainly been declared unsellable to the south, and its presence in the north proved that men are often equal in their tastes wherever they live. One night, when the hall's talking had turned to a murmur and the lamps had been trimmed and the cold was the polite kind that sits outside and does not pound on the door, Jon stood at the gate and looked out at the winter road he had built in ink and then in men's feet. Ghost came to lean his weight along Jon's leg. Jon put his hand in the wolf's fur and spoke aloud to the air and to the boy he had been at the foot of the first keep. "I thought making new oaths would feel like breaking old ones," he said, "and it does. But it also feels like the old ones never meant nothing but this. I am the shield that guards the realms of men. I thought that was a wall, but a shield moves. A shield goes where the blow is. A shield remembers the man behind it and lets him breathe." Ghost's ears pricked, and Jon looked up. Two figures were coming along the road. A man and a woman, tall and bowed, carrying nothing but the way they held themselves. They came to the gate and stopped, and the man looked up with the same eyes he'd had when Jon was a boy. Howland Reed bowed his head. "My king," he said, and then he smiled like a man who had found the right thing to say in a place where wrong words had cost dearly. "Forgive an old habit." Jon felt something loosen in his chest that he had not known was clenched. "I think we have better words," he said, "but you may call me what you like." Mira hugged her father and rolled her eyes at both men. Ghost nosed Reed's hand and accepted him, which was more than the faith could ever give any man. They spoke deep into the night about small histories and great lies, and Howland told Jon more than he had ever told anyone outside his hall in the bog. He told him truths he had once kept because he thought they belonged to a world that had died and forgotten itself. Jon listened until his head ached and then listened more, and at dawn he stood in the godswood of Queen's Crown, little and thin and probably offended at the comparison, and bent his head and felt like a boy, which was a rarer blessing than any crown. After that, winter took another bite because it does, and the Legion kept on. The winter oath became a thing men spoke with familiarity enough to grumble about it and seriousness enough to keep. The black oath remained a thing the Legion held like a blade that had been sharpened too many times to be allowed into a fool's hand. Boys grew into men with Legion shows on their sleeves and girls grew into women with the same, and old men hung blankets over their doors with the open gate stitched in heavy wool and felt safer than they had in years, which they might not have admitted 4 winters ago. Tormund learned to keep a ledger and pretended to complain and secretly loved it. He had discovered that fairness written down is an argument you can win without killing anybody, and he developed a hunger for that kind of victory that surprised him and pleased everyone. Ragna married a fisherwoman from the river and did not tell anyone until Jon noticed the extra bowl at her bed's foot. And then they both laughed and decided this was what no wives meant now. That if you took the winter oath, you did not bind someone to your uncertain nights, and if you took the black oath, you bound yourself to the legion's bed instead and did not make excuses about it. Varric became as much a judge as a fighter and found that men would listen to him when he spoke not because they feared his blade but because they feared his fairness. Ser Talwyn's scar itched when rain threatened and he learned to predict weather better than most farmers, which gave him an importance he had never had at court and never wanted. One autumn, Sansa came north with a train that was deliberately smaller than any queen might bring to a place she feared would wonder about her worth. She wore her wolf and her iron, and she stood in the watch hall and listened to children recite letters and to men recite law, and when Jon walked her through the winter grounds, she stopped and knelt in the dirt beside a cabbage and said, "My mother would have laughed to see me like this." And for a moment she was 13 and then she was something else again, which was what the world does to a Stark if it can. She watched the Legion's oath taken at dusk by 3 children and 2 men and 1 crooked, hard-faced woman who'd been a bandit and had decided she preferred work she could sleep with. The words went up into the air and the air held them and the wood of the hall remembered them. Sansa touched the banner with the open gate and did not recoil at the black. She smiled once, slowly, like a woman who had kept winter at bay with policy and fire both, and who was pleased to see someone doing the same with a different set of tools. "I will not always agree with you," she told Jon, perpendicular to a laugh later near the fire. "I would worry if you did," Jon said. "I would worry you were tired." "I am tired," Sansa said and looked into the fire. "But I am not finished." Neither was he. He had thought he had been finished once. He had thought that the edge of a blade and the edge of a choice were the same line. He had learned otherwise. The Legion made him learn daily. There were failures because it was the world. A woman on a winter oath ran in her 4th year because she had seen her husband across the road with a goose in his arm, and she had wanted to put her hand onto his cheek and make him say he loved her 5 times. The Legion caught her and brought her back, and she served her remaining winters with a bitterness that scoured anything kind that came near it. A northern lad on the Black Oath was found with liquor in his bedroll and a maiden in his bed, and he lied about both badly and lost his cloak and wept, which was worse than the loss in Jon's mind. A then man broke a glover's jaw for a joke that had been meant to be friendly and had landed like a brick, and the then man could not understand why he should be fined for not liking words when words had never liked him. They all stayed anyway. They all hated and cleaned up and hated less and ate. One night, when the wind was high but predictable, Jon rode out with Ghost because he could and because the road had turned into something that lied less. He rode into the haunted forest not deep but deeper than a commander should, as if he had decided he was not the kind of commander who followed only his own rules. The trees there had accepted new history with the stolid refusal that trees have always had to new gods. They watched him and did not move and did not care. Ghost did care. He moved in arcs and loops and brought back the smell of hair and the smell of other wolves and the smell of the faint, old magics that had not gone no matter what had died on a blue night. They came to a clearing where the snow had retreated to the edges and the ground lay bare and brown. In the center, a stone thrust up, carved a long time ago by hands that had cared more about placing something in the world than about what it looked like. Jon dismounted and put his hand on the stone, because that had become how he spoke to things he could not quite name. He felt warmth under his glove very faintly, as if the world kept embers where it could, and he smiled and felt foolish and did not stop. He spoke in a low voice about plans and failures, aloud to a piece of stone in the wood like a madman who had built something bigger than himself and needed to say the building out loud to make it lighter. Ghost huffed and circled and lay, and the trees did not laugh because they had already explained to the world that men are not interesting enough to mock. He dreamed there, at the foot of the stone, or if he did not dream, he did something very similar. He saw a road going north into white and south into green. He saw men with dust on their boots and women with babies on their shoulders moving along it. He saw traders with bells on their carts and soldiers carrying winter's law like a table they set and cleared. He saw a boy with a spear walk past him and into the hall and back out a man with ink on his fingers, And he saw a girl ride up with her hair braided for speed and stop and take the winter oath and tie a strip of cloth to the gate banner before riding out again to tell her mother that the Legion did not take her away so much as it gave her back to herself in pieces. He saw Sansa's child standing at the edge of winter and measuring it with a smile that reminded him of the father he had thought was his and the father he had had without knowing it. He saw Bran as a tree and a raven and a boy and a man, looking and not looking and saying nothing, because sometimes saying nothing is the only way to say that everything is being seen. He woke with Ghost's nose against his cheek and the morning pretending it had not been night, and he felt better without having earned it. He rode back and found Ragna making a list with a stub of charcoal and a look that said she would take any man who wasted with this winter and make him into a signpost. He found Tormund arguing with Ser Talwyn about the quality of flour, and both men pretending not to enjoy the argument. He found Sam writing a letter and frowning at his own pen until it capitulated to his stubbornness. "Where have you been?" Sam asked, not looking up. "In the woods," Jon said, not willing to gild it. Did the woods answer? They always do. It's just a matter of whether you understand their language. Sam finished a line and shook the parchment gently so the ink would pay attention. "The crown will be pleased with our numbers," he said. "They will have other things they want the gold to do, and they will invent them even if those things do not exist. We should show them that this gold prevents wars they would have to show in songs." "We don't write songs," Jon said. "Someone will," Sam said, smiling to himself. That winter, the mists moved north again, farther than the Crannogmen liked. The Legion sent braziers and reeds and careful men, and discovered that careful men are sometimes the first to die because they assume their caution is sufficient. A boy went into the mist with a rope on his waist and came back with the rope cut clean and ice burns on his arms where the air had grabbed him and held tight. Jon stepped into the mist once with a scarf over his mouth and a thought in his head that was not strictly sensible, and he stepped back because sensible had learned to be louder in him and the world had learned to reward it when the cause was good. Mira brought an old woman who sang to the reeds and to the wind, and the mists pulled back just enough to be called cooperation. And that was the measure of the victory. Just enough. There were births, and they learned what births look like when a hall has law and law has kindness. There were marriages, and they learned to use rope and firelight and bread to mark them instead of swords and banners, because those had learned to mean other things in their hall. There were deaths, and they learned to put the dead where the living could walk by and remember without falling into a pit of their own making. Jon grew older by winters more than by years. The gray in his beard made the younger ones treat him with an affection that surprised him. He had become simultaneously more and less frightening. The scar on his belly ached when storms came, and the old wounds in his heart sometimes woke up and asked to be fed. And he fed them with work and with Ghost's quiet breathing, and with the sight of men who had once wanted to cut one another's throats standing in a line to get porridge and arguing about the fairness of raisins like brothers. He rode to the wall sometimes and pressed his ear against the ice again and listened for the hum. It was less now, or else he had learned to hold it in his bones so it did not knock so loudly at his skull. He was content to have it either way. He did not go south. The South came to him in letters and in men who wanted what the Legion had built and in men who wanted to take it or copy it or break it. Sansa came sometimes and brought a child who learned to hold a bowl and a spear with an equally serious grip. Brienne came and stayed and taught a dozen girls to look men in the eye and a dozen boys to look women in the eye, and all of them to keep their chins unbitten by pride. Davos came and brought stories he swore were true and everyone else swore were lies until they found out they were true and decided to be disappointed about it. Years gave the Legion a history, and history argued with history. A boy born in the first year of the Charter stood in front of Jon in the 10th with a winter oath in his mouth and a stubborn angle to his jaw, and Jon felt older than he wished to feel and younger than he had expected to be. Ragna's child clambered up a ladder and looked at a piece of sky as if planning to bargain with it. Varric sat at the tribunal and handed a man back his pride and took away his grudge. Sam left and returned and left again, and each time brought a word that meant still in a new grammar. Ser Talwyn died in his bed with his scar going pale on his face and a satisfaction on his mouth that made everyone in the hall briefly wish they had known him less as a captain and more as a man. They built a second gate banner when the first had darkened with cooking smoke and the grease and joy of fingers. They hung the first in the watch hall, and men touched it as they went out on patrol without speaking, because touching it became a habit that did not require explaining. They carved a saying on the beam above the hearth, words that had been argued by 3 councils and 36 dinners. The road is a promise. Keep it. One summer night, when it was still light enough to read without a lamp and the air smelled like cut grass and boiled onions, Tormund sat beside Jon on the low wall and breathed like a bellows with a hole in it. "This is not a bad thing to have done with a life," he said, and Jon felt the words go into his bones as if they had been looking for a place to settle. "No," Jon said, "it is not. Still," Tormund added, "because still is also a road. We will die. And someone will come and try to put it back the old way or put it into a new bad way. And then some other Jon will stand here and some other big fool will say this is not a bad thing to have done with a life. And then we will be in the ground arguing with worms in our heads." Jon laughed, surprised and grateful. "Not a bad argument to have," he said. "Worms are almost as stubborn as Starks." "Almost," Tormund said, and clapped him on the shoulder so that Jon's teeth knocked together. The Legion's first great failure came in the 12th year. It came out of the simplest thing, a child. A free folk girl disappeared on the winter road between the 2 wintering grounds, and when children disappear the world turns into a fist. The Legion turned out and the North turned out and the air turned itself inside out, and men rode while women held cities inside their bodies so their damn hearts would not break out. They found the girl 2 days later with a boy from a northern farm, both of them trying very badly to be older than they were. The world breathed again, and then the world realized it had held its breath too long and got angry. The free folk father wanted blood. The northern mother wanted blood. The children wanted a hole to crawl into and never emerge from. The Legion wanted mercy that would not teach men to take mercy for granted. Jon sat tribunal and felt the world and the hall and all the old and new law lay heavy on him. He could see the hanging in the air and could see the mercy in the air and could see that both would teach too much and not enough. He thought of his own youth and the ways in which no one had held him with the right kind of force. He thought of the Legion which existed to hold with that force. He thought of the road and the promise. He thought of Ghost, who would put his body between a child and a wolf without thinking about the politics of it. He cleared his throat and the hall went so still he could hear dust settle. "The Legion's law about children is this," he said. "Children make mistakes in hunger and in love and in fear, and they are ours to teach. We will not kill children for doing what they do without us. We will take these 2 into the Legion's house for 2 winters. They will learn work and letters and law. They will see what a debt looks like and what forgiveness tastes like when it's not sweet. When 2 winters are done, they will return to their people if both families still wish it, and both will have to bring something of worth to that return. If the families do not wish it, they will stay with us and we will have failed in one thing and succeeded in another." "What do we get in the meantime?" the free folk father asked, his voice raw as meat. "You get to come to dinner," Jon said. "You get to speak to your daughter as much as she wishes to be spoken to. You get to watch her grow tiresome and stubborn and beautiful and alive." He looked at the northern mother. "So do you." The father swore a river of oaths and the mother swore an ocean of complaints. And both came to dinner and both swore again and then less. And the children learned to lift their own heads in the hall and to lower their voices when grief came to sit beside them. 2 winters passed and both families decided to take their chances on one another, which was a kind of grace the Legion could not have ordered from any man or king. The years kept, as they do when men notice them, and the Legion kept too. The charter hung and was amended and hung again with the amendments. The watch hall beams darkened with smoke and the road widened with wagons and the winter road pushed its way further north and south. And the Legion began to be a thing men in Dorne and the Reach spoke of as if it were a fable about northerners who had found an industrious way to survive boredom. When the first southern noble sent a son north as a winter oath to prove a point, the Legion taught the boy sums and how to mend a boot and how to feed a woman's baby without telling the woman how to live. And the boy returned south with a jawline harder than his father's and a look that made the father unhappy for reasons he could not articulate. The boy married a girl who asked him if the snow made a sound like the sea, and he cried when it rained in summer and no one knew why, and that was how it should be. Jon grew into the kind of command that forgets to call itself that. He became a man boys looked for when there were 2 choices and both looked ugly. He became a man women entrusted with their anger because he would not wrap it in linen for his own comfort. He became a man who understood that any law worth anything has to account for the hour when law would prefer to look away. He listened and fought and wrote and rewrote and put his hands on stone when he needed to remember what a thing feels like when it is older and more patient than he will ever be. When he died, because he did die, he died in a bed that had been made by a girl who had sworn the winter oath and who had taught herself to knot rope that would hold men on the road and hearts in the hall. He died with Ghost under his hand, and he died with Tormund snoring doing battle with a storm outside, and he died with Sam sitting with his hand on his arm, a book in his lap and tears on his face, and he died with Sansa's letter in the drawer like a trinket a boy keeps because it reminds him of an afternoon in summer. He died without a sword in his hand, which had been the goal since the day he first took one. The Legion did not stop. The Legion had written itself into the wood and the road and the people, and it did not stop. Children came into the hall and took the oath and left the hall and remembered you could keep a promise with your feet as well as with your tongue. Men came to the hall with blood in their mouths and left with bread on their tongues, and some of them came back to say they had found work where the road went because of the work they'd been given where the road began. Years later, when a winter heavier than even the old men had promised arrived and pressed cold fingers against every bolt and buckle, when the braziers burned and the reeds had been set and the mists had come to the edge of the road and chosen to sit instead of swallow, a woman stood with her child under the open gate banner and told him a story in the steam of her breath. "It was not a king that built this," she said, putting her hand on the boy's head to keep him from running at the wrong grown-up. "And it was not a lord. It was men and women who were tired of old blood and who learned to make new blood go the right way. And it was a man who had been told duty was a sword and who learned it was a shield and a road. Remember that. Swords are easy. Roads are harder. Shields must be held a long time. Outside, the world did what it always does. Tried to break men. The Legion did what it had been built to do. Took breaks and mended them. Kept the road. Kept the gate open. It kept a promise that had begun at a wall and had turned into a way of walking, and the walking kept men alive. And that was, as Tormund had said once beside a summer onion field, not a bad thing to have done with a life.